Hi friends, now today's video is me giving you recommendation on YA contemporaries. I think YA contemporaries are fantastic for readathons. I think they're great to read at this time of year when it's coming up to the end of the year and you might be trying to get your Goodreads goal completed. These tend to be quite quick reads. Now, the first two books by one author that I really want to talk about and start this video off with her books because they're not talked about much on BookTube. However, here in Australia, they're actually pretty popular. When I was in school, like everyone was reading them, and that is Melina Marchetta. Now, Looking for Brandy, I've talked a bit about on my channel. I usually read this book once a year. I relate so closely to this main character. When I was in high school, I really related to her. She goes to an all-girl Catholic school. I went to an all-girl Catholic school. She's Italian-Australian. I'm Italian-Australian. And the way she's snobbish and arrogant kind of reminds me of Emma from Jane Austen's Emma. And I just love her because I think that's a really realistic depiction of someone who's her age and still has so much to learn about the world. And I just can't recommend this book enough. I think it deals with a lot that you don't expect. And what's really incredible about this book is it was actually published like mid-90s. So this book is old, but it still deals with so many relevant topics and conversations. Also, what I love about this book is every time I read it, I tend to relate to a different character because this book does focus on Josie's relationship with her mum, her nonna, and then also her father, who she didn't know growing up. And at the start of this book, he comes into her life for the first time. I've talked about this a fair bit on my channel recently, but the book I really want to recommend is Jericho Road. Jericho Road and On the Jericho Road is the two titles that it usually has. I don't know why. Publishing, I have questions. This book, I feel like, is very well loved by people who have read her books. Like, this is my personal favorite, but I feel like most people love this book over Looking for Brandy and her other books. This contemporary book follows a girl who grows up at this like boarding house. She was abandoned by at age 11, and we followed her when she's about 17 in this, and we are switching between two different timelines. So we're following the main character Taylor's story and her kind of struggles with what's happened to her in her past and her mystery and that unknowing, and then we also have this other kind of mysterious storyline. There's a lot of mystery to this book, so I don't really want to tell you a whole lot because it does end up being a story that intertwines two stories, and it's a very insightful, captivating, heart-wrenching read. I love the writing in this. I love Melina Marchetta's writing in general, but this one is almost like stream of consciousness kind of writing, and it just flows. Like, I found as soon as I picked it up, I was captivated, but it's just one of the most memorable stories I've ever read. It also has my favorite first sentence of a book. The first sentence of this book is, "My father took 132 minutes to die." Like, don't you want to know what's next from that? What I think stands out to me with Melina Marchetta and her books is she is so talented at writing family dynamics. Family relationships are the number one focus relationships in her books. She does tend to have friendship and romance relationships that are on the side, but family is front and center. And thinking about it now, I always go on about how much I adore family relationships in books and how much I appreciate it. And I actually think it might be because of Melina Marchetta and growing up reading her books, and how that was always the central part of her books has just made me love it and appreciate it and want to see it in more books out there. She does also tend to touch on mental health. I think her contemporaries are so underhyped on BookTube, and they're such quick reads. And I think if you're going to start anywhere, start with Jericho Road because that seems to be one of her most popular books. The next book I want to talk about is Challenger Deep by Neil Schusterman. I know Neil Schusterman's YA series, the Scythe series, is that what it's called? Really popular in here, but I think this is my favorite book of his. It follows this boy who starts having schizophrenic episodes, and so the story is told in him struggling with coping his everyday life and what's happening in his everyday life. And then we also have this other narrative where it's him on a boat on a sea, traveling the sea and dealing with like pirates and sea creatures and other people he encounters, and that whole sea journey and voyage is like a metaphor for the mind and how his mind and his schizophrenia, how that sort of transcends. It's just so clever. I listened to the audiobook. I would love to get my hands on a physical copy one day and reread it and annotate it because there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of symbolism and metaphors, and the whole sea and the voyage entirely symbolizes his schizophrenia and how that unravels and him coping with it or him not coping with it. It's a story that didn't have a whole lot of plot, but it gave me so much to think about and so much to pick and pull apart to kind of understand. Now, Neil Schusterman isn't schizophrenic, but his son is, and I think you can can really tell that in his writing. Like, he really knows what he was writing about, and I think it's also a story with a lot of heart and heartbreak because of the struggle, and I just think more people need to read it. I know a lot of people go on about his life series, but I wish more people would talk about this because I think it's a really important book as well. I know it's won awards, so I know it's popular out there, but I just feel like BookTube hasn't really taken hold of this book yet, and I really think they should. It's a book with so much meaning and is so clever with how it is told, and I always appreciate stories that kind of are told in a different way. The next book I want to recommend is Call It What You Want by Bridget Kemmerer. Now, I was kind of put off for contemporaries for a really long time, and I picked this up at the end of last year on a whim. I loved this, and this book kind of restored my faith in contemporary YA, because for a very long time I feel like most contemporary YA was just like fluffy romance, fun but didn't hold a lot of substance for me, and nothing that was really quite memorable. But man, this book just made me reinstate my faith in YA contemporaries. Now, this story follows two characters, Megan and Rob, and Rob was the popular boy in school. He was the it boy. He came from a rich family. He was in the football team. He had all the popular friends, and then it was discovered that his father embezzled a lot of money, and it was this huge scandal. They live in a small town, so everyone knew about it. His father also robbed money from a lot of friends of Rob's parents, and his father attempted suicide, but his father survived the suicide attempt. However, now he is bedridden pretty much, and Rob and his mother have to look after him, but also they're still dealing with the aftermath of what his father did, and that aftermath includes their reputation, their loss of friends and support, and them also being not as financially stable as they once were. So Rob is dealing with a lot, and then we also follow Megan, who is the goody two-shoes. Her dad's a cop. She's always been a straight A student, a good girl student, but she cheated on her SATs, and she's also dealing with that reputation of having been discovered to be a cheater. At the beginning of the story, these two characters are paired up in an assignment that they have to work on together, and they've never really interacted with one another, but they start to find out that they have a lot in common, especially with what they've recently been dealing with and having like these reputations thrust on them and dealing with consequences. I love this book because it talked a lot about regret and mistakes and how you have to move on from that, and how you forgive yourself for that, how you forgive others for their mistakes, and what you can do moving forward. I loved the relationship between Rob and Megan. I also really loved that we got to know side characters, like Megan's sister comes part of the story. Her sister does also have her own thing going on, which Megan also has to try and help and deal with. I think I read this in like one afternoon, and I just cannot recommend this enough. It had just a lot going for it. For such a short contemporary book, it spoke for a lot. I also did really enjoy Letters to the Lost, which is Bridget Kemmerer's other contemporary book that is quite popular. I didn't love this as much just because I found the main female character in this to be quite irritating. She was just very judgmental. But this story follows a girl whose mother's died, and she starts finding these letters on her mother's grave, and they're written from this boy, and they start doing this letter exchange, and this boy is dealing with a lot. He comes from a bit of a broken home with a bit of a tragic past, and then these two start to form a relationship. But I preferred this. Still really loved this. This was like 4.5 stars for me. This was more of a 4, so I highly recommend these. Now, the next book I want to talk about is With the Fire and High. I won't spend too much time on this one because it is such a BookTube darling book that I feel like a lot of people have read it for good reasons, and if you haven't, you need to change that. This book follows a teenage mum, which I just love because I don't think I've ever read a teenage mum book before this one, and we follow her juggling what it's like to be a mum, also trying to still be a student at school and pursue her career because she does dream of becoming a chef one day. We also follow her get into this relationship with this boy and what that's like. We see her and the baby's father and their relationship, but what is really, I think, the center of this book is family. She has been raised by her grandmother. She has quite a complicated relationship with her father. He's kind of out of the picture, but not really. They're still sort of communicating, but he's just off doing his own thing. Her mother is dead. It's so interesting to see her having that important role of being a mother while also not having her own parents in her life and what that is like for her. This book is just so wholesome and with so much depth to the characters and to culture and to family and to like the complicated situation that this girl is in when she's still so young. I think it also did a really good job of not being too much in depth with those themes, like especially those heavier themes. Like they were definitely there. I think some people might have wanted a little bit more from that, but I liked that we got a taste of all these different themes while also having this really light-hearted contemporary story about this young girl in high school that also wants to have a romance and also has dreams of becoming a chef. I think it was just such a delightful, wholesome, warm read. There's a reason everyone goes on about Elizabeth Acevedo's books, particularly this one, and I cannot recommend it enough. The next one I want to recommend, which is another book I have not stopped talking about for quite a while, and that is Monday's Not Coming. We follow a girl called Claudia whose best friend Monday has gone missing, and this story is told in two timelines, and we're switching between Claudia's perspective, present day, trying to find out what happened to Monday and where Monday is, and then also past timeline, and we see their relationship and their life and what they mean to one another and all of that. I just think this story did so much because these two girls and their relationship dynamic really carried the entire story. I feel like some of the mystery was pretty obvious most of the time while you were reading it, but I was just so captivated by the writing and the story itself and these girls and their friendship with one another that I just had to keep reading. I just love this book. I was so impacted by this book. I think that the way we really got to understand these two and their relationship and what they mean to one another was so powerful. Like Claudia, the main character, she is an only child. She doesn't really have any other friends. She does struggle in school, and Monday is not an only child, but these two act like sisters, and Monday is always helping her out with school and stuff. And you see in the present timeline how much of a struggle it is for Claudia to get by without Monday. Not only is she dealing with the loneliness of not having her best friend around, but also struggling with school and not having that one person to talk to when things are happening. I listened to the audiobook and I really strongly recommend the audiobook. I thought it was so good and I couldn't stop listening to it. The next book I want to talk about is Sadie. Now this book is so popular, but for all the right reasons. I again recommend the audiobook for this. It is one of the most fantastic audiobooks I've ever listened to. It has a full cast, there's like a podcast element to it, there's all these sound effects. It is incredible. Now this book follows a girl who starts chasing after her sister because something has happened to her sister, and you're following her story, but then you also have this podcast element where this podcast is trying to uncover what happened to this girl, because now this girl has gone missing. This girl is called Sadie, by the way. So the podcast is interviewing people and going around trying to figure out what happened to Sadie, and then also what happened to her sister, and then you're also following Sadie trying to figure out what happened to her sister. So this story is just entrenched in mystery. It's also quite thrillery, I would say, because there's this really intense element to it of like trying to figure out what happened and like where is Sadie. I think it's such a quick read because not only is it short and in contemporary, but just the whole intensity of the story, you won't want to put this down. So it's the perfect book to read like towards the end of the year because it's fast. You get that one extra book on your Goodreads goal. And I also think if you're in the Northern Hemisphere and it's fall coming into winter time soon, such a perfect time to read this book because of that atmosphere. I know you've probably heard about this book before, so I'm not going to say anything else. There is a reason why everyone on BookTube goes on about this book, and you will find out once you read it. The last book I want to talk about is Permanent Record. Now, I sort of hesitated a little bit to put this on because this book, I feel like it's going to be a miss for quite a few people. I loved it because it was so refreshing to me. It's a very mature take on YA contemporary. In fact, I would actually say that this isn't really YA. I don't feel like this book is written for teenagers. I feel like it's more written for college or university age students. We are following this boy who has just dropped out of university. His family doesn't know. It's something he's keeping secret. He's kind of lost with what he wants to do, so all he's really doing at the moment is working at this like mini supermarket. One night this girl comes in, and this girl is a celebrity, like one of the top celebrities. They kind of have like a meet cute, they exchange numbers and they do keep in contact, and we do see their relationship throughout the book, but their relationship, I would say, isn't the central part to the book. It's very much focused on Pablo, the main character, and his journey from being lost to trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life and finding his passion again, and just that sense of being a young adult and being thrust into the adult world, having to know what you want to do with your life, just really struck a chord with me. There's so much focus in a lot of YAs about figuring out what you want to do in high school, but so very few of them look at what it's like after high school and those first few years of university and what it's like to really be in university, and then also to discover that you don't like what you're doing and you want to change, but it feels like you've failed. Like, just the thought of changing can make you feel like you're the biggest failure and that nothing's going to work out, but you're still so young and you still have so much time to do things. I just loved that whole storyline, and I would say that storyline from Pablo is the main storyline. Like, there is definitely a relationship that he forms with this girl, and we do kind of look at his relationship with his family. The characters in this are quite unlikable, but I think that made them so realistic, and I loved their flaws. Like, I really loved how realistic their flaws are. I can see a lot of people not liking it, but I loved it. I really loved it. And it was one of those books I finished, and upon finishing I kept thinking about, and so I think like my rating is higher than what I originally rated it. So those are all the books. Let me know if you pick any of these up because of me, and I really hope that you're enjoying whatever you're currently reading, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!